Chapter 3. Actions and Consequences. Rick Pav. Back at Camp Quarry, 20 minutes later, the peaceful afternoon at the quarry camp had shattered. Rick's knuckles were white, his jaw clenched tight enough to ache. He was pissed at Shane. Just minutes ago, the tranquil sounds of the camp had been ripped apart by frantic yelling and desperate cries. Hearing the commotion down by the lake, Rick, Glenn, and a few others had sprinted towards the source, their boots kicking up dust on the worn path. They arrived to a grim tableau. Shane, a picture of unrestrained fury, kneeling over Ed Peletier, Carol's husband. Shane's fists were pistons, driving blow after blow into Ed's already bloody face. Carol's frantic pleas were lost in the wet thuds of impact. Rick and Glenn lunged forward, grabbing Shane's arms, hauling him bodily off the prone man. Daryl, Merle, and Charlie moved to check on Ed, while Amy, Jackie, and Carol huddled together, shaken and tearful. Shane didn't utter a word, just shoved Rick and Glenn away with surprising force before stalking off into the trees, leaving a heavy silence broken only by Ed's pained groans and Carol's sobs. After questioning Jackie and the others, the ugly truth spilled out. Ed had been abusing Carol. When he'd come down to the lake to drag her away from Jackie and Amy, they'd tried to intervene. That's when Ed had lashed out, striking Amy. Shane, nearby, had witnessed the altercation. Instead of de-escalating, he'd unleashed a savage beating. Carol had begged him to stop, her voice raw with terror, but Shane had ignored her and the others, lost in his rage. If Rick's group hadn't arrived, Ed might not have survived. "You gotta talk to him, Sheriff," Merle rasped as they trudged back up the hill towards the main camp. Dust clung to their boots, and the late afternoon sun felt harsh. "He keeps this up, it'll cause a lot of problems for the rest of us. Ain't no place for a loose cannon like that?" "I'm with Merle on this one, Rick," Glenn added, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim concern. He wiped sweat from his brow. "Hadrien left me and Matt in charge of perimeter checks, but we can't have someone with anger issues like Shane walking around armed. It's a disaster waiting to happen." Rick remained silent, the weight of leadership pressing down. He remembered seeing Lori standing frozen near the path as they'd run down. After Shane stormed off, their eyes had met across the distance, hers wide with shock and something else, maybe guilt. His own stomach had twisted. "You know your wife and Shane had a thing, right?" Daryl's blunt voice cut through Rick's thoughts, causing his jaw to clench even tighter. Daryl walked beside him, his crossbow slung over his shoulder. "I'm just saying, maybe you ought to sit them both down and hash things out, clear the air. It'd cause less tension between y'all and maybe—" "Shut up!" Rick snapped, the words sharp and sudden, his glare silencing Daryl instantly. Heat flooded his face. "I'll deal with it when the time's right." He couldn't face that now, not with everything else crumbling. "All right, it's your call, Sheriff," Merle said smoothly, putting a restraining hand on Daryl's arm and steering him away. "Come on, Daryl, venison ain't gonna skin itself." Just as the group was about to disperse towards their tents, Kevin came running up, breathless but excited. "Hey, Andrea just radioed in. They've got the survivors and are on their way back. Loaded with supplies." "How many survivors?" Rick asked, grasping for something positive, something he could control. 8, Kevin puffed, "and one of them's a U.S. Marshal." A flicker of relief washed over Rick. He nodded curtly and led the way towards Dale's RV. Jim sat on a crate nearby, sipping water from a canteen while Dale perched on the RV roof, binoculars trained down the access road. "They're here," Dale announced, lowering the binoculars slightly. "I count 7 vehicles. Hadrian's a PC in the lead, then a GMC truck, an SUV, a muscle car, looks like an Impala, a semi-pulling an oil tanker, and a big modern RV bus bringing up the rear." Rick squinted down the dusty track. Sure enough, the small convoy rumbled into view, led by the imposing black PC, the sight of the vehicles. The promise of new people and resources momentarily pushed aside the ugliness of Shane's actions. A fragile sense of hope bloomed in his chest. Maybe they could make it. Maybe this was the turning point they needed. CPOV, 2 hours later, in the Beast, a PC. The camp buzzed with renewed energy after our arrival. I'd handled the introductions, the Winchesters, Harvels, Singer, Jackson, Ash. and Jess meeting Rick's group, a chaotic but necessary blur of names and handshakes. Then came the real work, unloading and distributing the mountain of supplies we'd hauled back from the gas station. Canned goods, bottled water, tools, and boxes of MREs were quickly organized under Dale's watchful eye. Rufus, beaming like a kid at Christmas, happily helped siphon precious fuel from the tanker into the camp's generators, the sharp smell of diesel cutting through the campfire smoke. Rufus, Bobby, Dale, Jim, and Victor, another camp elder, had quickly formed a grizzled council, swapping stories over lukewarm coffee near Dale and Bobby's parked RV. Dean, ever the charmer, introduced himself to Rick and Shane as a U.S. Marshal, effortlessly sliding into a position of perceived authority. Andrea had taken Joe, Jessica, and Ellen under her wing, introducing them to Lori, Carol, and the other women, who were already incorporating the new food into the communal stew bubbling over the central fire. Glenn gave Sam, Ash, and Dean the camp tour, emphasizing the perimeter watch schedule we'd established. One spent a few minutes with Daryl and Merle, admiring the deer they were butchering near their tents, the rich coppery scent of blood strong in the air. Daryl's quiet competence was impressive. Then for the past 2 hours, I'd focused on my sanctuary, the APC, using the gas welder we'd scavenged. Sparks flying and metal singing under the torch, I'd reinforced the interior. 5 sturdy metal storage boxes were now securely welded to the floor and walls along the right side, perfect for ammo, sensitive gear, or personal items. The APC's cavernous interior still felt spacious. I'd left the 4 foldable seats on the left intact, but cleared the space behind them where I'd ripped out 4 others. This left a generous area on the left side, perfect for my sleeping bag and personal gear. The carriage was neatly divided, seating on the left near the cab door, storage and living space towards the rear ramp. "Hey, Hadrien, you done with the welder?" Sam's voice broke my concentration. He stood at the foot of the lowered rear ramp, peering curiously into the modified interior. The afternoon light streamed in, illuminating the newly welded seams and the faint smell of hot metal. "Yeah, it's all yours, dude," I replied, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. "Just let it cool for a few more minutes." "Gotta say, you got yourself a sweet ride here," Sam said, carefully eyeing the welder resting on the ramp. "Seriously armored." "Thanks. Your GMC truck's pretty cool too," I acknowledged, stepping down to join him. "But, if I'm being honest, I think it would be better long-term if everyone in camp switched to military trucks or MRAPs. Better armor, more space, designed for rough terrain and threats. They'd offer real protection, not just transportation." "I'm not arguing there," Sam agreed, hefting the cooled welder. "Dean, Rufus, and Joe have been saying the same thing to Ellen and Bobby since Memphis. We just haven't come across any worth taking that weren't swarmed or stripped bare." He paused, looking at me thoughtfully. "Say, how old are you, by the way? Didn't get a chance to ask back at the gas station." 18, I replied. "I'm guessing you're a college student." Or were. I already knew the answer, but the lie needed consistency. "Yeah," Sam sighed, a flicker of loss in his eyes. "Jess and I went to Harvard. I was studying law before the world decided to end." He shifted the welder's weight. 18, huh? Not bad. I'm guessing you grew up in the life, hunting, weapons training? All that?" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the kunai on my thigh and the sword hilt over my shoulder. "Yep," I answered smoothly, maintaining the fabricated backstory. "Guessing you and your brother went through the same drill?" I steered the narrative back to him. "Yeah," Sam's expression turned wry. "I hated it. That's a big part of why I left for school. Then my dad died, Dean came to find me. And before I could really process any of that, the damn zombie apocalypse hit." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Talk about timing. What are you guys talking about?" Dean materialized beside the APC, his arrival as sudden as always. He leaned against the armored flank, arms crossed. "Oh, nothing much," Sam replied, giving me a knowing look. "And just bonding over shared childhood trauma." "Trauma?" Dean raised an eyebrow, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "So you tell Hadrien here about your crippling fear of clowns, then?" I couldn't help but chuckle. The familiar Winchester dynamic, even in this hellscape, was weirdly comforting. Really? Clowns? I asked Sam, feigning surprise. Don't say a word, Sam warned, his ears turning pink as he turned and carried the welder purposefully towards his truck. Come on, Sammy, it was a joke. Dean called after him, shaking his head with genuine amusement. He turned his attention back to me, his grin fading into a more serious expression. So what's your plan, kid? Glenn told me a bit about your vision to build a real community. Sounded solid. Spill it. What exactly you got in mind? I gestured for Dean to climb up into the APC. He did, his eyes taking in the modifications with appreciation. I spread out a worn map of Atlanta and its surrounding counties on one of the fold-down seats. Using a charcoal nub, I outlined my thoughts, the quarry's vulnerability, the need for defensible terrain, sustainable resources. We talked strategy, logistics, threats beyond walkers. Dean listened intently, interjecting with sharp observations about fortifications, water sources, and patrol routes honed from years hunting things that went bump in the night. We eventually circled a location. The Georgia State Prison facility, about 20 miles out. It offered walls, infrastructure, and isolation. But I made him swear secrecy. This was for Bobby, Ellen, Rufus, Sam, and Joe only, for now. The others still see me as a kid, I said, locking eyes with Dean. The fading light through the open ramp cast long shadows. And we're both still new faces in this camp. If we push this now, they'll balk. We give advice, help where we can, prove our worth, build trust. When the time's right and our words carry enough weight, that's when we present the prison. They'll listen then. Dean gave a slow, understanding nod. The unspoken agreement hung between us. Then his trademark smirk reappeared. Before I forget, he said, leaning closer conspiratorially, that cute blonde Amy? She's been making eyes at you like a lost puppy all afternoon, practically orbiting your truck. Hey, I smirked back, playing along. Might get lucky tonight, maybe even convince her sister to join. The implication was clear. Dean's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled with genuine laughter. Ha ha, you and me, dude. We are gonna be good friends, he clapped me on the shoulder. Oh, by the way, he added as he climbed down the ramp, I heard you asked Bobby if he had a Winchester repeater. What was that about? Oh, that? I shrugged, following him down. Kinda always wanted to use one, classic piece. If you happen to have one tucked away, I could trade you an HKM P5 for it. Fresh out of an APC armory. I patted the sleek submachine gun slung across my back. Hey, see? Dean's grin was triumphant. Told you we'd be good friends. Never actually laid hands on an MP5 before. Bring it over when you're done locking up your fortress. We'll do the exchange then. I gave him a final nod as he sauntered off towards the Winchester's parked Impala. I finished stowing the last of my gear, ammo boxes carefully placed in the new welded compartments, some items vanishing into the storage scroll tucked away in a hidden panel. Satisfied, I climbed out, secured the heavy rear doors with a satisfying clunk, and adjusted my gear. Sword harness settled, kunai pouch strapped tight, Glock holstered, and the MP5 for Dean ready. As I moved towards where the new arrivals had pitched their tents near Ellen and Joe, I spotted Amy waving hesitantly from near the central fire pit. I changed course. Hey, Hadrien, Amy greeted me with a tentative smile, holding out a burlap sack. The flickering firelight played on her face. I finished your laundry. Here, they're all mostly dry. Her voice was soft. Thanks, Amy, I replied, taking the sack. The fabric felt warm, smelling faintly of soap and lake water. Appreciate it. I started to turn, my mind already on the weapon trade with Dean. But something caught my enhanced eye. A faint, discolored patch high on her left cheekbone, nearly hidden by her hair. Even without activating the Sharingan, the detail was clear, the fading but unmistakable imprint of fingers. The sack of clothes slipped from my grasp, thudding softly on the dusty ground. A cold fury, sharp and sudden, ignited in my chest, burning away all other thoughts. Amy, my voice dropped, low and dangerously calm, cutting through the camp's ambient noise. Who hit you? Her eyes widened, fear flashing across them. Huh? Oh, "It's nothing," she stammered, instinctively raising a hand to cover the bruise, her gaze darting away. "Amy," I repeated, the steel in my voice brooking no denial. I gently but firmly took her chin, tilting her face towards the firelight, forcing her to meet my gaze. The mark stood out clearly now. Who did it? Under the intensity of my stare, her resistance crumbled. Reluctantly, haltingly, she told me about the confrontation at the lake, Ed trying to drag Carol away. Her and Jackie intervening, Ed's hand striking her face, Shane's brutal retaliation. She pleaded with me, her voice trembling, not to do anything. Ed was already badly beaten, she insisted. Carol and Sophia had been through enough. Upsetting them further wasn't worth it. I listened, but the cold fury only intensified. Mercy for scum like Ed wasn't in my vocabulary, especially not when he'd touched someone under my protection. "Wait here," I instructed, my voice devoid of warmth. I left her standing by the fire, the forgotten laundry sack at her feet, and strode purposefully towards Dean Winchester, who was leaning against the Impala's gleaming black hood. "You brought it." "Good," Dean said, straightening up as he saw the MP5 in my hands. He popped the Impala's trunk, unlocked a sturdy metal case inside, and pulled out a beautifully maintained 1886 Winchester short rifle repeater. The worn wood gleamed dully in the fading light. We exchanged weapons smoothly, the modern MP5 for the classic lever action. He handed me a full box of .45 to 70 government cartridges. "Fully loaded," he confirmed. Satisfied with the heft of the Winchester, I slung it over my shoulder. "Dean," I said, my voice low and serious, locking eyes with him, "I need you to have my back. About to do something monumentally stupid." I quickly relayed Amy's story, embellishing strategically, emphasizing Ed's violence towards the women, hinting at deeper cruelties, implying a pattern that threatened the camp's fragile stability. Dean's expression hardened with each word. "Do what you gotta do," Dean stated flatly, his hand resting on the shotgun now leaning against the Impala's fender. His hunter's instincts recognized necessary evil. "Trash like that don't belong here, not now, when the world's already gone to shit." He moved deliberately to a position near Dale's RV, giving him a clear line of sight towards the Peletier tent. "I'll handle interference." "Need more insurance," I muttered. I found Daryl near his tent, meticulously cleaning his crossbow. Merle was engrossed in tending the rabbit stew nearby. Perfect. I fed Daryl the same story, weaving in the most potent lie. Ed's abuse wasn't just towards Carol, but whispers of unspeakable things involving Sophia. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. Daryl's face contorted into a mask of pure animalistic rage. He lunged forward, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat. I grabbed his arm, holding him back with surprising strength. "I'm gonna end him," I stated, my voice cold and final, meeting Daryl's furious gaze. "I just need you to back up Dean, hold back Shane and Rick if they try to stop me. Can you do that?" "Fine," Daryl spat, the word dripping with venom. He wrenched his arm free but didn't charge. "Just end the fucker, you hear?" He snatched up his crossbow and stalked to a position opposite Dean, near Dale's RV, his body coiled tight, eyes fixed on the target zone. His knuckles were white on the weapon's stock. The trap was set. The camp buzzed with the sounds of supper preparation, unaware of the storm about to break. My own rage, a cold, focused thing honed by Itachi's instincts, simmered beneath the surface. No one laid hands on what was mine. No one. And Ed Peletier had just signed his death warrant. I turned, the weight of the Winchester solid on my shoulder, and walked with lethal purpose towards Ed and Carol's dimly lit tent. Carol and Sophia were safely occupied by the fire with Amy and Andrea. Good, they wouldn't witness the animal's final moments. Joe Pav. Joe finished hammering the last stake into the ground, securing the corner of her tent. She straightened up, rubbing the small of her back, and surveyed the bustling camp. The initial chaos of arrival had settled into a rhythm of unpacking and setup. She saw Dean leaning against the sleek black Impala, talking intently with Hadrien. The younger man handed Dean a sleek, modern-looking gun, an MP5. She recognized, and Dean passed him something longer, wood and metal gleaming dully in the late afternoon sun. A classic rifle, a trade then. but their body language was wrong. Too stiff, too serious. Hadrien moved then, not towards the new tents or the food distribution, but towards the area where the Dixon brothers had pitched their lean-tos near a cluster of pines. He approached Daryl, the intense younger brother, who was meticulously cleaning his crossbow. Merle was nearby, stirring a pot over a small fire, seemingly oblivious. Jo watched, her hunter's senses tingling. As Hadrien spoke to Daryl, she couldn't hear the words, but she saw Daryl's reaction as clearly as a lightning strike. One moment, Daryl was focused on his weapon. The next, his head snapped up, his body coiling like a spring. His face transformed, contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged forward, a snarl ripping from his throat that Jo could hear even across the distance. Hadrien grabbed his arm, holding him back, speaking rapidly. Daryl vibrated with fury, but after a tense moment he nodded sharply, a jerky, animalistic movement. He grabbed his crossbow and stalked away, positioning himself near the old man Dale's RV, his gaze fixed like a laser on a specific point across the camp, the Peletier tent. Dean, too, had shifted, moving to flank the other side of the RV, his hand resting casually but meaningfully on his shotgun. Jo froze, the tent stake forgotten in her hand. Whatever Hadrien had said, it had turned Daryl into a barely contained predator and put Dean on high alert. This wasn't just camp tension. This was a hunter setting a trap. Her eyes snapped back to Hadrien. He adjusted the strap of the old rifle now slung over his shoulder, his expression cold and unreadable. He turned and walked, not with haste, but with deadly purpose, straight towards the tent Daryl and Dean were watching. The camp's ambient sounds, the chatter, the clatter of pots, the crackle of fires seemed to fade into a tense, expectant hum. Jo held her breath, her knuckles white around the tent stake. Hadrien reached the faded canvas of the Peletier tent, paused for a fraction of a second, and then yanked the flap aside and stepped into the gloom within. The calm shattered instantly. A raw, guttural scream of pure agony ripped through the evening air, silencing the camp. It was followed by the violent sound of tearing canvas and a heavy thud. The slightly chubby, middle-aged man Jo vaguely recalled being introduced as Ed Peletier came flying backwards out of the tent entrance as if launched from a cannon. He crashed onto the hard-packed earth, skidding through the dust, clutching his face. Blood already welling between his fingers, a collective gasp rose from the camp. A collective gasp, sharp and involuntary, swept through the assembled survivors like a shockwave. Every eye was fixed on the crumpled form of Ed and the dark rectangle of the tent entrance. Hadrien emerged, not with haste, but with the chilling, deliberate calm of a storm front rolling in. He stepped over the threshold, his silhouette framed against the tent's dim interior. Dust motes danced in the slanting afternoon light around him, but his face was a mask of frozen fury. He held the Winchester repeater loosely at his side, his knuckles white on the stock. His gaze, sharp and predatory even from this distance, locked onto the whimpering man at his feet. "You got 10 seconds, Ed." Hadrian's voice cut through the stunned silence, cold, clear, and devoid of mercy. It wasn't shouted, yet it carried to every corner of the quarry ledge. 10 seconds to get your sorry. No good, lazy, good-for-nothing, child-abusing ass up and out of here. He raised the Winchester slightly, the movement smooth and terrifyingly final. "Because if you're still in front of me by the time I count to 10, he paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air, thick as the scent of blood and dust. "I'm gonna shoot you in the head." Third-person POV. Rick's heart hammered against his ribs. Chaos. Shane's beating of Ed was bad enough, but this was an execution. "Hadrien, stop!" Rick yelled, instinct overriding caution. He took 2 quick strides forward, hand reaching out, not towards the gun, but towards the young man radiating lethal intent. "This isn't the way." "We can—" He never finished. Dean Winchester materialized beside him, a solid wall of denim and flannel. The former hunter's hand clamped down on Rick's shoulder with surprising strength, halting him mid-step. "Easy there, Sheriff," Dean murmured, his voice low but firm, his eyes fixed on Hadrien, not Rick. "Let the kid handle his trash." Rick tried to shrug him off, anger flaring. "Handle it? He's about to murder a man in cold blood." Dean's grip tightened, his gaze finally flicking to Rick. There was no malice, but a chilling certainty. That man laid hands on women and kids. In my book, that ain't a man, that's a rabid dog needing put down. You step in now, Sheriff, you're protecting the wrong person? Think real hard about who your camp needs. Dale, his face pale beneath his weathered hat, moved next. His gentle nature recoiled at the violence, the finality. Son, please, he called out, his voice trembling with distress. There's got to be another way. Exile him. Tie him up. Something. Don't do this. He took a hesitant step towards Hadrien, driven by a desperate hope for reason. He didn't get far. Daryl Dixon stepped into his path, his crossbow held low but unmistakably present. His eyes, usually guarded, burned with a fierce, protective fire. Stay put, old man, Daryl growled, the sound like gravel underfoot. His gaze was locked on Carol and Sophia, not Dale. Kid's right, that piece o' shit don't deserve breathin'. He hurt the girl. The raw conviction in Daryl's voice, the absolute certainty that Ed's fate was just, stopped Dale more effectively than any physical barrier. He faltered, his protest dying on his lips as he saw the truth reflected in Daryl's furious eyes. Shane saw his chance, the chaos, the divided attention. Rick stalled by Dean, Dale blocked by Daryl, Hadrian's focus entirely on Ed. He would be the one to restore order. He'd beat Ed, yes, but this was different. This was usurping his authority, his role as protector. All right, kid, that's an OUGH. Shane bellowed, striding forward, his hand dropping towards the pistol on his hip. You don't get to play judge and jury here. Put the damn gun down now. He reached out, intending to grab Hadrian's arm, to physically disarm him, to assert control. He saw Hadrien turn his head slightly, those dark eyes snapping towards him. There was no fear, only a flicker of cold assessment. Shane's fingers were inches from the younger man's bicep when it happened. Hadrien moved. Not a full step, just a pivot of the hips, an economy of motion that was breathtaking and terrifying. His left arm, previously hanging loosely, became a blur. A fist like forged steel connected with Shane's jaw with a sickening crunch. Shane's world exploded into white light and agonizing pressure. He felt his feet leave the ground, his body twisting unnaturally. He had a microsecond sensation of flying before darkness swallowed him. He hit the dirt like a sack of grain, utterly still, a thin trickle of blood leaking from his slack mouth. The camp gasped again, the sound louder this time, laced with shock and primal fear. The man who had been their fierce protector lay unconscious, felled by a single, effortless blow. Carol's heart felt like it was being torn in two. Terror for Sophia, ingrained fear of Ed, and a desperate, illogical need to preserve the monstrous man she'd called her husband warred within her. Seeing Shane fall, seeing the absolute lethality in Hadrian's posture, broke her paralysis. She stumbled forward, collapsing to her knees beside Ed's writhing form, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Hadrien, please," she sobbed, her voice ragged with despair. She reached out a trembling hand, not touching Ed, but beseeching the young man holding the gun. "Don't, please, don't kill him. Just make him leave. Please, for Sophia. For me." Her words were a raw plea, born of years of ingrained subjugation and the terrified hope that violence could still be averted. She looked up at Hadrien, her eyes wide with a desperate animal fear. Hadrian's gaze shifted from the pitiful, bleeding Ed to Carol's tear-streaked face. The cold fury didn't vanish, but it was joined by a steely resolve. He lowered the Winchester slightly, not pointing it away, but the immediate threat eased. His voice, when he spoke to Carol, was softer than before, yet it still carried the weight of command. "Carol," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, "I'm not doing this for vengeance. I'm doing this for you and your daughter. For every other woman and child in this camp." He swept his gaze around the assembled survivors, his eyes lingering on Lori holding Carl, Amy clutching Andrea's arm, Jackie's pale face. "We can't have an animal like him among us, preying on the young and weak just to make himself feel superior." He looked back at Carol, his intensity pinning her. Think of your daughter, Carol. What if one day Ed here decides to take out his frustrations on her just as badly as he does on you? What if he decides she's not respectful enough? He let the horrific image hang in the air. I'm ending a threat to you and to her right here. Right now. He then shifted his focus, his voice softening further, becoming almost gentle. Sophia, he called. Come here. Don't be afraid. Sophia Peletier, a small, fragile figure dwarfed by the adults, had been clinging to Amy's legs, her face buried in the denim. At Hadrian's call, she flinched. Slowly, hesitantly, she peeled herself away from Amy, her wide, terrified eyes darted from her mother sobbing on the ground to the bleeding form of her father, then finally to Hadrien. Something in his calmness, in the directness of his gaze, seemed to pierce through her fear. Step by tiny step, she walked towards him, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Hadrien knelt, bringing himself down to her level as she approached. He didn't touch her immediately. When she stopped a foot away, trembling, he reached out slowly, gently tilting her chin up with 2 fingers so her eyes met his. His gaze was unwavering, filled with a conviction she'd never seen directed at her. A father, Hadrien said, his voice quiet but resonant in the utterly silent camp, is supposed to love and protect his children, not to bring them fear. His thumb brushed lightly over her cheekbone, wiping away a stray tear. A father is supposed to make his child feel untouchable, safe, like nothing in the world can hurt them, not terrorize them, not make them feel small and worthless. He held her gaze, his dark eyes seeming to see right into her wounded soul. He nodded slightly towards Ed, is not fit to be a father. He never was. The words were a balm and a liberation spoken aloud. You don't have to be scared of him anymore. Not ever again. His promise was an anchor thrown to a drowning child. I promise you, Sophia, that from this day forth I'm gonna protect you. His voice gained strength, a vow etched in steel. I won't let him or anyone else hurt you. Not ever. After today you won't be afraid of him anymore. He offered a small, reassuring smile. You'll grow, you'll heal. And like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, you'll spread your wings. He released her chin, opening his hand palm up towards the sky. And you'll fly. Amy watched, her breath catching in her throat. She saw the rigid terror in Sophia's small frame begin to melt under Hadrian's words, replaced by a dawning, fragile hope. She saw the absolute conviction in his eyes, the fierce protectiveness radiating from him as he knelt before the trembling girl. It wasn't just about eliminating a threat. It was about saving Sophia, about offering her a future free from fear. A warmth flooded Amy's chest, intense and overwhelming, completely different from the physical attraction she'd felt earlier. This was deeper, purer. It was admiration crystallizing into something profound. She saw not just the dangerous warrior, but the protector, the avenger, the one who spoke truths others whispered and acted where others hesitated. He saw Sophia's pain and offered sanctuary. He saw Ed's evil and offered extinction. The absolute certainty of his actions, the righteous fury tempered by gentleness towards the victim, ignited a fierce, all-consuming love within Amy. At that moment, watching him promise safety to a broken child, Amy knew she was irrevocably his. Andrea, standing frozen beside her sister, felt a different kind of heat bloom low in her belly. The raw display of power was intoxicating. The effortless way he dispatched Shane, the chilling calm as he delivered his ultimatum to Ed, but it was the shift to Sophia that truly undid her. Seeing Hadrien, the lethal predator, kneel and speak with such unexpected tenderness, such fierce, unwavering commitment to protecting the vulnerable, it was a potent, dangerous aphrodisiac. A flush crept up Andrea's neck as she watched him. Her gaze traced the line of his shoulders under the flannel shirt, remembered the defined muscle of his bare chest earlier. God, he's magnificent, she thought, a thrill running through her, strong, decisive, protective. The memory of his hand around her throat in Atlanta resurfaced, not with fear now, but with a jolt of illicit excitement. He could dominate utterly. And now, seeing this capacity for focused gentleness? It's been too long, Andrea admitted inwardly, shifting slightly. A familiar ache, ignored for weeks in the struggle for survival, reawakened with startling intensity. She felt a dampness between her legs, a purely physical reaction to the overwhelming aura of controlled power and unexpected compassion radiating from Hadrien. She wanted him. Not later. Now, the thought was sharp, primal, momentarily eclipsing the grim drama unfolding before her. Dean watched Hadrien with Sophia, a flicker of surprise crossing his normally sardonic features. He'd expected the kid to be ruthless, the canaille, the takedown of Shane, the cold promise to Ed confirmed that. But this careful gentleness with the terrified girl, these words that were equal parts comfort and liberation, it was unexpected depth. He'd seen victims before, haunted kids with dead eyes. Hadrien wasn't just removing the threat. He was trying to heal the wound. Kids got layers, Dean mused internally, his grip on his shotgun relaxing slightly. More than just a trained killer. He gets it. The real monsters aren't always the ones that rot. He glanced at the unconscious Shane, then back at Hadrien. He'd stopped Rick on instinct, trusting Hadrien's purpose. Seeing this, the fierce protectiveness directed at the kid solidified that trust. He'd made the right call. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about safeguarding the camp's future, starting with its most vulnerable. Dean gave a barely perceptible nod of approval. Yeah, he could follow this kid. Daryl's crossbow remained steady, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sudden movement, but his focus was locked on Hadrien and Sophia. He heard the words, the promise of protection, the vow to end the fear. They echoed something deep and primal within him, a resonance with his own fractured childhood, his own desperate need for someone to stand between him and the monsters. He saw Sophia's tiny frame, saw the way she looked up at Hadrien, not with the cowed terror she'd shown Ed, but with a dawning, tentative trust. Daryl knew that look, knew how rare it was, knew how easily it could be shattered. Hadrien wasn't just killing a man. He was building a wall around that girl. A wall Daryl himself would have killed for at her age. The fierce anger that had propelled him earlier morphed into a grim, unshakable resolve. He wouldn't let anyone break through that wall now. His finger tightened slightly on the crossbow's trigger. Anyone who tried would get a bolt before they took a second step. Hadrien was doing what needed doing. Daryl would make damn sure he finished it.
Rick felt sick. The violence, Shane unconscious, Ed bleeding and broken on the ground, Carol's sobs, Sophia's fragile hope. It was a whirlwind of horror, but Hadrien's words to Sophia, the undeniable rightness of his promise, clashed violently with the impending execution. Rick's core belief that humanity, that civilization, could be preserved even here, surged forward.
Hadrien, Rick called out, his voice strained but loud enough to carry. He took a half-step forward, Dean's hand still a warning weight on his shoulder, but no longer actively restraining. I hear you, what he did. It's monstrous, unforgivable. He looked at Carol, at Sophia, his heart aching. But killing him in front of his daughter, in front of everyone. He shook his head, his eyes pleading with Hadrien. Is this the world we build, where we become judge, jury, and executioner? Where the answer to brutality is more brutality? He gestured around at the camp, at the terrified faces. We're trying to hold on to something here. Something better than just survival, compassion, law, exile him, cast him out. Let the wilderness have him. But don't make Sophia watch her father's brains get blown out. Don't make us watch it. That stain. It doesn't wash off, it changes us. It changes you. Rick's voice cracked slightly. Please, there's another way. Show us mercy isn't dead. Show Sophia that justice doesn't have to look like this. Hadrien listened to Rick's plea, his gaze never leaving Ed, who had started to whimper more loudly, sensing a possible reprieve. Rick's words were earnest, born of a hope Hadrien found almost tragically naive. Mercy? For this? The image of Amy's bruised cheek flashed in his mind, superimposed on the terrified faces of Carol and Sophia he'd seen moments ago. Rick's better world was a fragile dream Ed would only ever exploit or shatter. He looked down at Sophia, still standing beside him, her small hand now unconsciously touching the hem of his pants. He saw the lingering fear in her eyes, mixed with the fragile trust he'd just planted. Rick was right about one thing. She shouldn't witness the shot. Not close. Slowly, deliberately, Hadrien straightened up. He shifted his grip on the Winchester, his finger sliding near the trigger. He looked at Ed sprawled in the dirt, blood and dust caking his face. "Get up, Ed," Hadrien commanded, his voice devoid of inflection. "You heard the sheriff. You're getting mercy." "More than you deserve," he gestured down the dirt track leading away from the camp with the barrel of the rifle. "Start running, that way. Don't look back. Don't stop." Ed stared, disbelief warring with desperate hope. He scrambled clumsily to his feet, swaying, clutching his injured face. He looked at Carol, at Sophia, a flicker of something ugly and possessive in his eyes, quickly extinguished by terror as he met Hadrian's gaze. "Go!" Hadrien barked. Ed flinched violently. Then, with a ragged sob, he turned and stumbled into a shambling run, heading down the track away from the camp, away from the silent, watching crowd. His figure grew smaller, receding into the distance, a pathetic, broken silhouette against the backdrop of the Georgia pines. Hadrien raised the Winchester repeater smoothly to his shoulder. The polished wood felt cool and solid against his cheek. He sighted down the long barrel. The camp held its collective breath. 200 meters. Ed was a small, weaving shape now. Hadrien exhaled slowly, his finger tightening on the trigger. The crack of the rifle was shockingly loud in the stillness, echoing off the quarry walls. Far down the track, Ed's running form jerked violently, then collapsed forward onto the dirt road, a dark, motionless heap. Hadrien lowered the rifle. The echo faded, replaced by a profound, ringing silence. He turned slowly to face the camp. His expression was unreadable, etched in stone. He met Rick's horrified gaze, then Carol's tear-filled eyes, then scanned the stunned faces of the others, Glenn, Morales, Tudog, Lori, the newcomers. "We are not building a better world on the backs of broken women and terrified children," Hadrien stated, his voice clear and hard, carrying effortlessly. "We are not preserving humanity by tolerating monsters in our midst. Today we drew a line. A line between the living and the predators. Between protection and poison." He gestured towards the distant figure on the road. "That man was poison. He infected this camp with fear. He corrupted the sanctity of a family. He preyed on the weak. His existence was a threat to every woman, every child here." His gaze swept the crowd again, lingering on Sophia, who was now clinging tightly to Carol's side, her face buried in her mother's skirt. "His removal is not murder. It is pest control. It is protection." He took a step forward, his presence commanding absolute attention. "This world is harsh. It is brutal. It will test us in ways we can't imagine. But it does not mean we abandon our duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves. It does not mean we tolerate evil for the sake of a false peace." He raised his voice slightly. "Look at Sophia. Look at Carol. Look at Amy. They are why we fight. They are why we survive. They are the future we are trying to build, and I will not let anyone threaten them. Not from outside these camp boundaries, and certainly not from within." He paused, letting his words sink in, the weight of his conviction pressing down on them. "Respect the line. Protect the weak. Stand against the predators. That is the only law that matters now. That is the foundation of the community we will build. Or we die as animals, tearing each other apart in the dark." He held their gaze for a long, charged moment. Then, without another word, he turned. He walked past Carol and Sophia, giving the girl a small, reassuring nod. He walked past Amy, whose eyes shone with adoration. He walked past Andrea, who felt a fresh wave of heat flood her cheeks. He walked past Dean, who gave him a grim nod of respect, and Daryl, whose eyes held fierce approval. He walked straight towards his APC, the Winchester held loosely at his side, leaving the stunned, silent camp behind him. He didn't look back. Joe Pav. The silence after Hadrien disappeared into the APC was thicker than fog. Joe let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her heart was pounding, a frantic drum solo against her ribs. She looked around the small circle of her group, clustered near their half-pitched tents. Ellen's face was pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. Ash looked stunned, his usual bravado evaporated. Bobby was grimly polishing his glasses, avoiding everyone's eyes. Sam had an arm around Jess, who was trembling slightly. Rufus just stared at the APC, his expression unreadable. Damn, Ash finally breathed, the word shattering the fragile quiet. Kid, don't mess around. Mess around? Ellen whispered, her voice shaky. He just executed a man in cold blood, Ash. Cold blood? Bobby grunted, putting his glasses back on, his gaze sharp. Didn't look cold to me, Ellen. Looked calculated, looked necessary, that fella Ed. Heard what he was doing? What he was capable of doing. He glanced towards Carol and Sophia, now surrounded by Laurie and Amy. Hadrien saw a rabid dog. He put it down. Simple as that? Harsh? Yeah, but this world ain't a Sunday picnic. Necessary evil? Sam asked, his brow furrowed. He looked troubled. Rick had a point about becoming what we fight. Sometimes you gotta get your hands dirty to keep the filth off others, Dean said, joining their circle. He hadn't followed Hadrien. He leaned against the side of their SUV, arms crossed. His gaze was fixed on the distant shape on the road. Rick's dreaming if he thinks exiling that sack of shit would have solved anything, he'd have come back. Or found other victims down the road. Hadrien ended the threat. Permanently. Can't argue with the results. He spoke to the girl, Jess murmured, her voice soft. Sophia, did you hear what he said? He promised to protect her. He wasn't just angry, he was righteous. Righteous fury, Rufus rumbled, finally speaking. He spat on the ground. That boy, he's shinobi, through and through. They understand balance, protect the village, eliminate the threat. No gray areas. No second chances for snakes. He shook his head, a hint of reluctant awe in his eyes. Didn't think I'd see that code walking around in this mess. He's the real deal. Dangerous as hell, but necessary. Like Bobby said. Joe listened to them, the arguments swirling. The brutality of the act was undeniable, shocking, yet Dean was right. The threat was gone, Bobby's pragmatism resonated, and Hadrian's words to Sophia, the fierce protectiveness. That wasn't the act of a cold-blooded killer. It was the act of a guardian, ruthless. Absolutely, but also profoundly responsible. She looked towards the imposing black APC. Her earlier curiosity, sparked by his impossible skill with the kunai, had morphed into something deeper, more visceral. The controlled power radiating from him as he faced down the camp. The unexpected gentleness with the child. The absolute certainty of his convictions. It was terrifyingly attractive. A thrill, dangerous and electric, shot through her. He was unlike anyone she'd ever met, a lethal weapon tempered by a fierce, uncompromising code. In this broken world, he wasn't just surviving, he was imposing order. Ruthless, terrifying, magnetic order. And Jo Harville, Hunter's daughter, felt a powerful, undeniable pull towards the storm that was Hadrian Walters. The camp might fear him, but she found herself fiercely intrigued, and a treacherous part of her, the part that understood the harsh realities of their world, felt something dangerously close to admiration. The chapter closed on that unsettling realization, the echoes of the rifle shot and Hadrian's final speech still hanging heavy in the Georgia air. Third-person POV, that afternoon, 6:32 p.m. The heavy thud of the APC's rear door sealing shut cut off the distant sounds of the camp, the low murmur of voices, the crackle of the central fire, the ever-present, haunting moans drifting from the woods. Inside the armored beast, the air was still, thick with the scent of oil, steel, and the faint, lingering ozone from the welding earlier. Only the dim, battery-powered emergency light near the cab door cast long, shifting shadows across the welded storage boxes and the cleared space where a bedroll now lay. Hadrien stood near the map table, tracing a route with one finger, his back to the ramp. He didn't turn, but his posture shifted infinitesimally, a predator aware of another entering its den. Andrea stood just inside the sealed door, the sudden silence amplifying the hammering of her own heart. The cool metal felt like a barrier against the world, against the memories of the day, the walker, the terror, Shane's rage, Ed's bloodied face, and the unsettling magnetic presence of the young man before her. She'd told Amy she was checking on Carol, a flimsy lie. Amy's knowing look had stung, but the pull had been stronger than shame. "You came?" His voice was low, a vibration in the confined space, not a question, a confirmation. She didn't answer. Words felt inadequate, dangerous. The memory of his hand around her throat, the cold fury in his eyes, warred with the image of him moving like liquid death through the walkers, the effortless strength when he tossed Merle like a ragdoll, the unnerving calm as he planned fortresses with Dean, fear and a raw, undeniable attraction twisted together, a volatile mix propelling her forward. She crossed the short distance, her boots silent on the metal floor. He finally turned, his dark eyes catching the weak light, unreadable pools. There was no surprise, only that unnerving assessment. Andrea stopped inches from him. The air crackled with tension, thick enough to choke on. She could smell the faint, clean scent of soap cutting through the gore still clinging to his gear, see the subtle shift of muscle beneath his dark shirt. Her hand rose, tentative at first, then with sudden resolve. Her fingers brushed the hard line of his jaw, tracing the sharp angle. A spark ignited in his gaze, a flicker of something primal beneath the calm. He remained still, a statue letting her explore. Emboldened by his lack of recoil, her touch grew bolder. Her palm slid over the powerful curve of his shoulder, feeling the corded strength beneath the fabric. Down his arm, tracing the defined bicep, remembering the lethal speed with which it moved. Her other hand joined, flattening against his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. It was a rhythm at odds with the chaos outside, with the frantic pounding in her own chest. His hand closed over hers where it rested on his chest. Not restraining, but claiming. His skin was warm, calloused. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a slow, deliberate caress that sent shivers down her spine. His other hand came up, fingers sliding into the hair at her nape, tilting her head back gently but firmly. His gaze held hers, intense, searching. She saw the predator, the survivor, the dangerous enigma, and she saw the heat mirroring her own. "Are you sure, Andrea?" His voice was a rough whisper, barely audible over the sudden rush of blood in her ears. "This world doesn't do take-backs." Her answer was to surge forward, closing the last fraction of space. Her lips met his, not softly, but with a desperate hunger that surprised even her. It was a clash, a claiming, fueled by the adrenaline of survival and the terrifying allure of his darkness. He didn't hesitate. His arms locked around her, pulling her flush against him with shocking strength. One hand remained tangled in her hair, angling her head for deeper access, while the other slid down her back, pressing her hips hard against the undeniable evidence of his arousal straining against his tactical pants. The kiss deepened, turning fierce, consuming. His tongue invaded, exploring her mouth with a possessiveness that stole her breath. She met it with equal fervor, biting his lower lip, earning a low growl that vibrated through his chest into hers. Her hands were everywhere, clawing at the fabric of his shirt, sliding under it to scrape nails over the hard planes of his abdomen, feeling the ridged muscle flinch beneath her touch. He broke the kiss, his breath hot and ragged against her neck. "Too many clothes," he rasped, his voice thick with need. She didn't argue. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her own shirt, urgency making her clumsy. He was faster. His hands, impossibly deft, found the fastenings of her jeans, popping the button, dragging the zipper down in one smooth motion. The rough fabric slid over her hips, pooling at her ankles. Her shirt followed, discarded like a forgotten thought. Cool air kissed her skin, raising goosebumps instantly replaced by the searing heat of his gaze as it raked over her body, clad only in simple cotton underwear. He didn't speak. His eyes, dark and dilated, said everything: appreciation, hunger, possession. He stepped back. Just for a moment, his own hands moving to the buckles and straps of his gear. The sword harness clattered to the floor. The tactical vest followed. He yanked his shirt over his head, revealing a torso that was a map of lean, powerful muscle, honed to lethal perfection. Scars, pale lines against tanned skin, told silent stories of violence. The sight stole her breath anew. He closed the distance again, his bare skin hot against hers. His hands slid up her sides, thumbs brushing the undersides of her breasts, making her gasp. He hooked his fingers into the straps of her bra, pulling it down her arms with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving hers. The cool air hit her nipples, tightening them into hard peaks. A low groan escaped him as he cupped her breasts. his thumbs circling the sensitive buds, sending jolts of electric pleasure straight to her core. His mouth descended, capturing one taut peak, sucking deeply, his tongue flicking and teasing. Andrea cried out, her head falling back, fingers tangling in his dark hair, holding him to her. The sensation was exquisite torture, a sharp counterpoint to the rough scrape of his stubble against her tender skin. His other hand slid down, past the waistband of her panties, fingers finding the slick heat waiting for him. She gasped, arching into his touch as his fingers explored, stroking, circling her clit with maddening precision before sliding 2 fingers deep inside her. God, Hadrien ... double, quote, she moaned, her hips rocking against his hand, seeking more friction, more pressure. He lifted his head from her breast, his lips glistening. His eyes burned with an intensity that was almost frightening. Tell me you want this, he commanded, his voice rough gravel. His fingers curled inside her, pressing against a spot that made her see stars. I want it, she gasped, the words torn from her. I want you. He withdrew his fingers, earning a whimper of protest. His hands went to his own belt, the buckle clinking loudly in the silence. He shoved his pants and boxers down just enough, freeing himself. He was thick, hard, the tip already glistening. The sight sent a fresh wave of heat flooding through her. He lifted her effortlessly, her legs instinctively wrapping around his waist. He carried her the few steps to the bedroll laid out on the cleared metal floor. He didn't lay her down gently. He lowered her with a controlled roughness that spoke of barely leashed need, following her down, his body covering hers, pinning her to the thin padding. He positioned himself at her entrance, the broad head pressing against her slick heat. His eyes locked onto hers, holding her captive as much as his body did. Look at me, he ordered. She did. She saw the predator, the survivor, the dangerous boy who terrified and fascinated her. She saw the raw, unvarnished desire. He thrust home in one powerful stroke, filling her completely, stretching her deliciously. A cry tore from her throat, part surprise, part overwhelming sensation. He held himself deep for a moment, buried to the hilt, letting her adjust, his jaw clenched, a vein throbbing in his temple. The feel of him, so hard, so deep, so there, was almost too much. Then he moved. He set a relentless, driving rhythm, pulling almost all the way out before slamming back in with controlled force. Each powerful thrust rocked her body, pushing her against the unyielding metal floor. There was no finesse, only raw, primal need. His hands gripped her hips, fingers digging in, holding her steady for his possession. His gaze never wavered from hers, intense, demanding her surrender. Andrea met his thrusts, her own hips rising to meet him, her nails raking down his sweat-slicked back. The friction built, a coil tightening deep within her with every powerful stroke. The sounds of their joining filled the armored space. The slap of skin on skin, her gasping moans, his low, guttural growls, the rhythmic creak of the APC's suspension under their combined weight. The distant moans of the dead outside became a macabre counterpoint to their own desperate sounds of life. He shifted slightly, angling his hips. The next thrust hit a spot deep inside that made her cry out, stars exploding behind her eyelids. The coil snapped. Pleasure, sharp and blinding, ripped through her, wave after wave crashing over her as she clenched around him, her body arching off the bedroll. Hadrien! His name was a ragged sob torn from her throat. Feeling her climax, his control shattered. His thrusts became frantic, pounding into her with abandon, his own groans deepening. He buried his face in the curve of her neck, biting down lightly on the tender skin as his body went rigid. With a final, deep thrust and a guttural cry that sounded more like a snarl, he emptied himself inside her, pulsing hotly, his entire body trembling with the force of his release. He collapsed onto her, his weight crushing but strangely welcome, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps against her neck. She held him, her own body still trembling with aftershocks, her fingers tracing the scars on his back as their sweat mingled. The only sounds were their labored breathing and the faint, persistent moans from the world outside their steel cocoon. He lifted his head after a long moment, looking down at her. The predatory intensity had faded, replaced by a look of sated exhaustion and something else. a flicker of something almost vulnerable in the depths of his dark eyes. He brushed a strand of damp, blonde hair from her forehead, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "Told you I don't break easily, Sheriff," Andrea murmured, her voice hoarse, a ghost of her earlier defiance returning, laced with newfound intimacy. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it appeared. "No," he agreed, his thumb tracing her swollen lower lip. "You don't?" He rolled off her, pulling her with him so she lay half-sprawled on his chest. His arm wrapped possessively around her. "Get some sleep, Andrea. Dawn comes early, and the dead don't wait." She nestled against the solid warmth of him, listening to the strong beat of his heart gradually slowing. The fear was still there, a cold ember beneath the warmth of shared exertion. But so was something else, a terrifying sense of belonging, forged in the darkness of the apocalypse and the heat of their collision. Outside, the dead moaned. Inside the beast, wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous man she'd ever known, Andrea closed her eyes. Sleep, for once, didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a stolen moment of fierce, fragile life. And the unspoken question hung heavy in the air between them, as tangible as the scent of their joining. What about Amy? Amy POV? The campfire's distant glow painted shifting shadows on the APC's armored flank. Amy approached quietly, barefoot on the cool earth, a bowl of venison stew held carefully in her hands. Hadrien hadn't eaten, disappearing after his chilling speech and the distant crack of the rifle. She'd seen the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the grim set of his jaw. He needed this. She needed to see him, to offer something, comfort, reassurance. Her own heart still thrummed with the terrifying, exhilarating cocktail of fear and adoration his actions had ignited. The APC's rear door was slightly ajar, a sliver of weak lantern light spilling out. She pushed it gently, the heavy metal yielding with a soft groan. "Hadrien, I brought you some—" The words died in her throat. Inside, sprawled on the thick sleeping bag laid out in the cleared space, lay Hadrien and Andrea, naked, entwined, Andrea's blonde hair fanned across his chest, one leg hooked possessively over his hip. Hadrian's arm was draped around her, his head tilted back, eyes closed, but not asleep. He turned his head the moment the door moved, those dark, unnervingly aware eyes locking onto Amy. A hot knife of betrayal and humiliation plunged into Amy's chest. The bowl slipped from her numb fingers, clattering loudly on the metal ramp, stew splattering everywhere. She stumbled back, her face flaming, tears instantly blurring her vision. She'd been such a fool. The shared looks, the lingering touches she'd dismissed, Andrea had moved first. Always faster, always bolder. "Amy!" Andrea gasped, scrambling to cover herself, her face a mirror of shock and guilt. Hadrien moved with that impossible, fluid speed. He was off the sleeping bag and down the ramp before Amy could fully turn to flee. He caught her wrist gently but firmly. She tried to wrench away, the hurt a raw, open wound. "Amy, wait," he said, his voice low, urgent. He pulled her back, not roughly, but with undeniable strength, guiding her into the dimly lit interior of the APC. The door swung shut behind them with a resonant clunk, sealing them in. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, sex, and her spilled stew. "Let me go." Amy choked out, refusing to look at Andrea, who was now sitting up, clutching a blanket around her shoulders, her expression stricken. Hadrien didn't release her. Instead, he turned her to face him, his other hand lifting her chin, forcing her tear-filled eyes to meet his. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice softening slightly but still holding an edge. "You think I don't see you? You think what I feel for Andrea cancels out what I feel for you?" Amy flinched, trying to look away, but his grip was firm. "I saw you today, Amy," he continued, his thumb brushing away a tear that escaped. "I saw your courage trying to protect Carol. I saw your kindness bringing me food. I see the fire in you, the loyalty, the beauty." His gaze flickered towards Andrea, then back, intense and encompassing. "This world is ending, the old rules. They're dust. What matters is who stands beside you, who you trust, who you protect." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Andrea understands this. She accepts it. She knows my strength isn't divided by sharing it, it's multiplied. He looked directly at Andrea. Isn't that right? Andrea swallowed, meeting his gaze, then looking at her sister. The guilt was still there, but beneath it, a dawning acceptance, a fierce possessiveness of her own towards the man who had dominated her moments before. He's not like other men, Amy, Andrea whispered, her voice husky. He doesn't belong to one, he protects what's his. And he wants us, both of us, to be his, together. She held out a hand, trembling slightly. We're sisters. We've always faced everything together. Why not this? Why not him? The raw vulnerability in Andrea's voice, the absolute conviction in Hadrian's eyes, warred with Amy's hurt and ingrained propriety. The image of Sophia clinging to him, the memory of his promise, the terrifying power he wielded for what he deemed right. It was madness, it was terrifying. Yet the pull was undeniable. The world was ending. Hadrien offered safety, strength, a terrifying kind of belonging. He saw her, truly saw her, just as he saw Andrea, and he wanted them both. The fight drained out of Amy. A sob escaped her, not just of pain, but of surrender. She looked from Andrea's outstretched hand to Hadrian's unwavering gaze. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in Andrea's. Hadrian's arms encircled them both, pulling them close against his bare chest. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The acceptance, the claiming, was absolute. The sisters leaned into him, into each other, forging a new, unbreakable bond in the armored heart of the beast. The outside world and its judgments locked away by heavy steel doors. What followed was a blur of tangled limbs, shared warmth, whispered reassurances, and the overwhelming, terrifying comfort of belonging utterly to the storm that was Hadrian Walters. Shane POV. Pain. That was Shane's first conscious sensation. A throbbing, nauseating ache radiating from his jaw, pulsing with every heartbeat. He groaned, forcing his eyes open. He was lying on his back inside his tent, the canvas walls blurry. Memory slammed back. Hadrian's cold eyes, the impossible speed, the crunch of bone, the taste of blood and dirt. Rage, white-hot and blinding, surged through him, momentarily eclipsing the pain. He pushed himself up, swaying, his vision swimming. That little bastard, that arrogant, murdering kid. He'd humiliated him, stolen his authority, killed a man in cold blood. Stumbling out of his tent, Shane ignored the curious, wary glances from people nearby. He scanned the campfire circle. Rick, he needed Rick, his partner, his brother. He spotted him near Dale's RV, talking quietly with Glenn and Morales. Rick! Shane's voice was a raw croak, laced with fury and pain. He staggered towards them, ignoring the way Morales instinctively stepped back. We gotta talk now! Rick turned, his expression weary, guarded. Shane, you should be resting. Resting? Shane spat, a fleck of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. While that psycho runs wild? He cold-blooded murdered Rick, executed him, then he laid me out. He jabbed a finger towards his swollen, bruised jaw. He's dangerous. Unhinged. We gotta stop him before he turns that gun on someone else. Before he decides we're the next predators. Rick sighed, rubbing his temples. Shane, what Ed did doesn't justify murder, Shane roared, drawing more attention. Since when did we become judge, jury, and executioner? That kid, he's playing God. He brought in strangers armed, and now he's eliminating anyone he doesn't like. He's a threat to everyone here. We need to disarm him, lock him up. Exile his ass before it's too late. Rick met Shane's furious gaze, his own eyes filled with conflict. It's not that simple, Shane. Some people agree with what he did. Carol, Sophia, that's fear talking. Shane snapped. They're scared of him now. We gotta show 'em we're still in charge, that the law still means something. Are you with me, Rick? Or are you gonna let that kid tear this camp apart? Merle POV. Merle watched Shane's tirade from his perch near the simmering stew pot, a greasy rabbit leg in his hand. He chuckled, a low, rasping sound. Look at all One Eye pitching a fit. Got his panties in a right twist, didn't he? Daryl, sharpening a knife nearby, didn't look up. Hadrien did what needed doing. Merle raised an eyebrow, taking a noisy bite. That's so? Didn't peg you for the kid's cheerleader, little brother? What's he got on ya? Promise you a shiny new crossbow? Daryl's hand stilled on the knife. He finally looked at Merle, his eyes hard. Saw the girl, Sophia, after. His voice was low, rough, fear, like a rabbit caught in a snare. Worse than that, broken. He met Merle's gaze directly. Ed weren't just hitting the wife, he was breaking the kid, slowly, every damn day. Macking her small. Macking her afraid of her own shadow. He spat into the fire. That kind of poison, letting it fester, that gets people killed slower but just as sure. Kid cut it out, clean. He went back to sharpening the knife, the scrape of steel loud. Glad he did it. Glad the bastard's dead. Merle chewed slowly, considering. The amusement faded from his face, replaced by a grim understanding. He'd seen broken things, made a few himself, but kids. That was a line even Merle Dixon rarely crossed sober. Huh, he grunted finally, tossing the bone into the fire. Well, hell, good riddance then. Saved us the trouble later. He picked up another piece of rabbit. Kid's got stones, I'll give 'em that. Hadrien POV. I listened to the soft, even breathing of the sisters entwined on the sleeping bag. Andrea's arm was draped possessively over Amy's waist, Amy's head tucked under Andrea's chin. Both asleep, finally. The tension, the hurt, the overwhelming newness of it all had drained them. They looked peaceful. Mine, the thought was primal, satisfying. They'd chosen it. Accepted it. The line was drawn, not just for the camp, but for us. Carefully, silently, I extricated myself, pulling on my pants, boots, and gray flannel shirt. I buckled the kunai holder onto my thigh, slid the Glock into its holster, and shrugged into the tactical vest. The weight of the sword harness settling across my back was familiar comfort. Finally, I picked up the Winchester repeater, its wood stock cool and reassuring. I checked the load, full. I glanced back at the sleeping forms, safe, for now. I locked the APC's rear doors from the outside with a heavy clunk. Let them rest. The camp needed dealing with. The smell of stew and wood smoke hit me as I approached the central fire. Conversation died instantly. Every eye turned to me, a mix of fear, respect, wariness, and outright hostility. Shane's bruised face was a mask of pure hatred. Rick looked exhausted and conflicted. Carol sat with Sophia clutched to her side, her eyes wide and grateful but scared. Dale looked mournful. Dean leaned against the Impala, arms crossed, watching Shane with open disdain. Bobby stood nearby, polishing his glasses, face unreadable. I ignored them all, walking straight to the large pot simmering over the coals. I ladled stew into a bowl, the silence thick enough to choke on. I found a spot on an upturned log, near where Glenn and his guys, Kevin, Matt, Charlie, Jimmy, Harry, Simon, were huddled, and sat down. I started eating. The stew was good, rich with venison and wild herbs. The silence held for maybe 30 seconds, then Shane exploded. Enjoying your victory feast, killer? Shane's voice was a venomous snarl. He stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger. You think you're some kind of hero? You're a murderer. A cold-blooded executioner. You strut around here with your guns and your knives, playing judge and jury, beating anyone who disagrees with you. You're a damn tyrant. I kept eating. Spoon to mouth, chew, swallow. His words were buzzing flies. You think you own this camp now? Shane raged, spittle flying. You think those women, he gestured wildly towards the APC, are yours to command? You brought in your gang of thugs, and now you're eliminating the competition? Ed was a bastard, yeah, but we had laws. We had a way. You spat on all of it. I took another bite. Carol flinched with every shouted word. Then softly she spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. He protected us, Shane. Me, Sophia. He stopped the hurting. Shane whirled on her. He murdered your husband in front of you. Before Shane could continue his tirade, a small figure moved. Sophia slipped away from Carol's grasp. Slowly, deliberately, she walked across the circle. She didn't look at Shane. She didn't look at anyone but me. She reached my log and, without a word, climbed up and sat down right beside me. Then she leaned her small body against my arm, resting her head against my bicep. Her trust was absolute, silent, and devastating. The camp gasped. Carol put a hand to her mouth, tears welling again, but this time of relief. Rick looked stunned. Shane looked like he'd been punched again. Dale cleared his throat, his voice heavy. "Hadrien, what you did, it was brutal." Unforgivably brutal to many of us. Taking a life? It changes a person. It changes a community. Rick spoke of mercy. "Mercy for the guilty is cruelty to the innocent, Dale," Bobby cut in, his voice gravelly but firm. He put his glasses back on. "That man was a cancer. You cut out a cancer, it's ugly, it's bloody, but you do it to save the body. Hadrien performed surgery. Necessary surgery." "Damn right," Dean added, pushing off the Impala. "Rabid dog gets put down, end of story. You exile him, he comes back or finds another family to torment down the road. Threat's gone, permanently." "Hadrien saved Sophia," Glenn said quietly but firmly. "Not just today. For good." "Yeah," Kevin chimed in. Matt, Charlie, Jimmy, Harry, Simon, all of Glenn's crew nodded, their faces set. "He protects us," Harry added. "He trains us. He sees the real threats." Lori, holding Carl tightly, suddenly spoke, her voice sharp with accusation. "He sees threats everywhere. He brings violence. He beat Shane senseless. He turned my son's friend into a killer," she gestured at Glenn's group. "He's dividing us. He's dangerous." Rick held up his hands, his voice strained but trying for calm. "Everyone, please, enough. We've been through hell today. We need to crack." The sound didn't come from the argument. It came from the tree line, a single gunshot, distant, panicked. Then another, and another. Then the moaning started. Not one or two, dozens, a low, guttural chorus rising from the darkness beyond the quarry ledge. "Walkers!" Morales screamed, pointing down the access road. Chaos erupted. People scrambled, screamed, dropped bowls. Shane's fury vanished, replaced by tactical alertness, but his eyes darted wildly. Rick grabbed Lori and Carl, pulling them towards the RV. I was already moving, pushing Sophia gently towards Carol. "Glenn, Kevin, Matt, circle formation, now, backs together." "Hold the line?" My voice cut through the panic like a blade. My trainees reacted instantly, years of discipline drilled into them in days snapping into place. They formed a tight knot, weapons, spears, bats, the handguns I'd given them, coming up. Dean, Bobby, Rufus, Ellen, Ash, Jess. "Sam, Joe, flanking positions, cover the perimeter." The hunters moved with lethal efficiency, decades of facing monstrous threats translating perfectly to the shambling dead. Rifles, shotguns, and Sam's pistol snapped up, aiming towards the encroaching shadows, resolving into stumbling figures at the edge of the firelight. Merle roared, grabbing his Benelli. "Daryl, with me!" The Dixon brothers charged towards Glenn's forming circle, adding their firepower. T-Dog, Jim the mechanic, Dale, Old Victor, Jackie, and Carol clustered instinctively near the hunters, finding whatever weapons they could, a fire poker, a wrench, a kitchen knife. Carol pulled Sophia close, her eyes wide with terror but staying put. I saw Andrea and Amy's pale faces appear at the APC's small side window, eyes wide with fear. "Stay put! Lock it down!" I bellowed towards them. Amy nodded frantically, pulling Andrea back inside. The APC's engine roared to life as Andrea presumably moved to the driver's seat, ready to move. "Focus, Joe!" Ellen's sharp command in her head cut through the green fog. She shoved the feeling down, hard. Survival first, always. She sighted down the barrel at a walker lurching towards Old Victor, who was fumbling with a screwdriver. Crack! The walker's head snapped back. Victor gasped his thanks. The horde wasn't massive, maybe 30 or 40, drawn by the earlier gunshot and the campfire. But in the dark, against panicked civilians, it was deadly. Screams tore through the night, not just from walkers. "Help me! Oh God, hell!" a woman's shriek. Rachel, Jackie's friend, cut off abruptly as three walkers dragged her down into the darkness beyond the firelight. Jackie screamed, frozen in horror until T-Dog yanked her back. "No, get off!" A middle-aged man, one of the older guys that fished, name unknown, flailed as a walker bit into his arm. Jim the mechanic swung a wrench, caving its skull, but another latched onto the boy's leg. Dean's shotgun roared, blowing the second walker apart, but the boy went down screaming, swarmed. His cries ended seconds later. Old Victor stumbled, his breath wheezing. A walker grabbed his jacket. Dale fired his rifle, hitting its shoulder, but it didn't let go. Merle's Benelli boomed, turning its head to pulp, but Victor collapsed, clutching his chest, gasping. He didn't get up. Died of a possible heart attack. Chaos reigned. Shane was firing methodically near Rick, protecting Lori and Carl near the RV. Rick fired his python, eyes wide with desperation. But it was Glenn's group, drilled relentlessly by Hadrien, that held the critical center. They fought back to back, a grim island of discipline. Kevin brained a walker with a bat. Matt stabbed with a spear. Charlie and Jimmy fired their pistols with shaking but determined hands. Simon fell, tripping over a log, and a walker pounced. Harry screamed and emptied his Glock into it at point-blank range, saving Simon but wasting precious ammo. Hadrien was the epicenter. He moved along their ragged line, the Winchester firing with deadly precision. Crack, a walker dropped. Crack, another. He didn't rush, didn't panic. He directed fire, shoved a panicked Harry back into line, kicked a stumbling walker off its feet for Glenn to finish with a spear thrust. His voice was a calm, relentless command in the maelstrom. "Hold the line, steady fire, aim for the head." Glenn, left flank tightening. Dean, watch the gully. "Bobby, covering fire on the right. Daryl, Merle, push them back from Victor's position." Joe fired again and again, the rifle's kick a familiar comfort. She saw Sam and Jess fighting back-to-back near the Winchester's truck, efficient and lethal. Rufus blasted walkers with his shotgun, roaring curses. Ash swung a fire axe with surprising effectiveness. Ellen was a calm anchor, picking off targets with her hunting rifle. But the losses mounted. Unseen people screamed and fell in the darkness beyond the immediate firelight. The camp's population, nearly 40 strong just hours ago, was being whittled down with brutal efficiency by teeth and panic. The named, the trained, the lucky held their ground. The rest vanished into the groaning dark. Joe pushed down another wave of irrational jealousy towards the sisters safe in the armored truck. Hadrien was here, fighting, leading, protecting everyone he could. His ruthlessness earlier had been terrifying, but his competence now was life-saving. She focused on his calm commands, his lethal efficiency, and poured her confused energy into the next shot. Crack! Another walker fell. Survival first, questions later. The line held barely against the tide of the dead. "Joe, with me. We bring everyone still breathing together," I yelled as I shot another walker in the head using the last of the bullets in the repeater. "Right behind you," came Joe's voice as she blasted a walker in the face when it got too close to her. "Glenn, Matt, hold the searles. Dean, you guys come and form up with Glenn and the others, you're in charge." I yelled at Dean, who was with Sam, Bobby, Rufus, Ellen, Jess, and Ash not far away. "All right, come on, let's regroup." Dean yelled, bringing his group to Glenn's, Sam, covering fire. "Rick, get your family over here." I yelled and unsheathed my sword, slicing a walker's head in half. "Joe, stick close. Merle, you and Daryl with us. Lead the way, kid." Merle yelled back as he and Daryl killed 2 walkers and joined us. We moved through camp, killing any walker we came across. It was dark, so we made sure we were all within sight of each other. The fight went on for another 5 minutes before the last of the walkers were killed. After that, I led Daryl, Merle, and Joe back to the campfire where the others were. Out of the 63 people that we had, now only 33 of us stood, still alive. The grim look on everyone's faces was profound. As we made back to the rest of the group, Sophia let go of Carol's hand and came running up to me. She buried her face into my vest and sobbed quietly. I picked her up and carried her back. Carol gave me a tear nod of gratitude. Glenn and the others, still breathing heavily, sat around the fire pit, exhausted. The night had come with an unexpected toll. But I knew this was only the starting point. And the world was only got to get more dangerous for us from here on out. Rick hugged Lori and Carl. Shane stood grim, face to the side, keeping a watchful eye on our surroundings. Daryl and Merle moved up and sat on the logs, still alert. Dean and the others let out breaths of relief as the death rattle and moanings of the walkers vanished, and the quiet of the night returned. A deathly silence and hush fell over all of us.